We're in the middle of a cooling system upgrade on this Jaguar F-Pace SVR, and we have a bunch of silicone cooling system hoses here that we need to install. Now, for today's video, we're going to be doing a drain and vacuum fill of this car's cooling system. Now, all the steps that I'm going to show you guys today are in accordance with the Jaguar Land Rover factory repair manual, but the procedures will generally apply to all other car makes and models out there. So let's dive in. Start by removing the under tray. In the case of the SVR, we have three 10mm bolts and a torque screw in each corner, as well as three 10mm bolts in the middle. So let's go ahead and do that.
It is a very rainy day today, and this is my view while removing the under tray.
Right, so once you have all the screws and bolts out of the F-Pace SVR's under tray, all you gotta do is drop this rear part right here, and the entire front perimeter should slide out of the bumper. So basically just pull this rear part down and then pull it backwards. Next, find your radiator drain plug and loosen that. Now, if you're planning to dispose the coolant, I also found this nice little drain pan right here. It holds around 3 gallons or over 11 liters. Basically, just lay it flat on the floor to collect the fluids that are draining from your vehicle. Now, in my case, I'm going to use a gallon container right here to catch all the coolant because I plan on reusing the coolant. I mean, this coolant is just 4 months old after all. So let's go ahead and drain it out. And once you have a nice controlled stream coming out of the radiator and going into your bottle or drain pan, you can go ahead and open the coolant reservoir cap to open the floodgates, so to speak. Still made a bit of a mess, so yeah, use the drain pan. Also watch out when you're working on a rainy day like this. Coolant is extremely slippery. I should also add that if you're planning to do a drain and vacuum fill, it's important to let all of the coolant in the system come out. So even if it slows to a trickle like this, just let it keep going, because that'll evacuate as much liquid as possible from the system, which then translate into as much air in the system as possible. And once you hook up the vacuum fill tool and introduce negative vacuum in the system, that air will technically expand to infinity, and that'll allow the coolant to seep into every nook and cranny in your cooling system. Once you're done draining, give the plastic drain plug a good rinse and reinstall it under the radiator. Now, you don't really need to torque this down with a lot of force. For reference, it took me around 5 or 6 turns before coolant started actually flowing out of the drain plug. So given that this drain plug and the radiator are both made out of plastic, I stop turning once I feel firm resistance on the wrench. So once you finish draining the coolant, you can go ahead and grab your vacuum fill kit. Now, this one right here that I have at home comes with a lot of adapters, and we're going to need this one for the Jaguar today. But since we also installed some silicone hoses, it's probably a good idea to do a pressure test first. And fortunately, this kit also comes with a pressure tester. So let's grab that and hook it up. All right, now that we have it connected, let's proceed and pump it up to 15 psi. All right, we now have 15 psi on the gauge, and the factory repair manual says to leave this be for, I think, 10 or 15 minutes, but let's just do 1 hour to be safe, and it's now 4:30, so let's come back at 5:30. All right, I went a little overboard. It is now 6:40. And the good news is we're still reading 15 psi, so this thing is ready to be vacuum filled. All right, storm fill going on, but it's time to do the vacuum fill. Now we have everything set up right here. So this is the main control unit that you're going to be using, and you're going to do the vacuum fill. And what we have here is this button that controls the airflow coming from your air compressor. So basically how this works is as air flows out from your air compressor, it kind of creates negative pressure right here. And if you open this valve, it goes to your coolant reservoir that basically allows the negative pressure to suck air out of your system. And this is your gauge. The target vacuum level that you want for this one, according to the JLR repair manual, is minus 23.6 mmHg. That's basically minus 0.8 bar. So that's what we're going to be aiming for later. And once you achieve that vacuum, you're going to do a vacuum test for a few minutes just to make sure that there's no leaks in your system. Now, I know we already did a pressure test earlier, but that's just another layer of safety to make sure everything's in working order. Now, once your vehicle passes that, you basically open this valve, which will then suck new coolant from your tank right here. Now, if you notice on this coolant suction hose, I just stuck an old gulp shaft on the end of it just because this was stored kind of looped inside the container, so it kept trying to curl up. And this just to make sure that the end of it sits on the bottom of the container. That way, we don't allow air into the system. All right, let's get started with the vacuum process. Now, if you notice, I'm fiddling a lot here. I'm repeatedly opening and closing the air input valve, as well as the valve that allows air to be pulled out of the system. And that's because I have nothing more than an 8-liter air compressor tank to work with today. Now, in an ideal world, you would have something like 50 or 80 liters, and that allow you to achieve your target vacuum in one go. All right, so we reach our target vacuum level at minus 23.6, and the repair manual says to allow 1 minute to check if this vacuum is held. Now, let's just go overboard and do 10 minutes to be safe. It's currently 8:16, so we'll come back 8:26. And hopefully the vacuum stays at the same level by then. Before we start filling her up, it's always fun to see what the vacuum does. Look at all those rubber hoses collapse. And our new silicone hoses as well. And that's because the vacuum actually causes air to be evacuated out of the system. And I checked this with Gemini, and at minus 0.8 psi, air actually expands to 600 to 700% of its volume. So whatever air pockets are in the system actually gets big enough to find their way out through the coolant reservoir cap and into the vacuum extractor. It is now 8:26, and our vacuum gauge still reads minus 23 psi, or maybe 23.2 psi. And that's a pass for me after leaving the thing on there for 10 minutes. If we really had the leak, it should have gone to zero by now. That's probably just the new silicone hoses breaking in. So we can proceed with filling this up now. All right, I have the hose down into the new coolant tank. And when I open this, coolant should start flowing into the system. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see that it's going all the way up, a little fluttering on the gauge, and into the tank. It's also interesting to note that the air pockets that expanded earlier actually pushed whatever remaining coolant that was still in the system up. But that doesn't really mean that the reservoir is already full. So coolant is still flowing all the way through and into the engine block and hoses. But you can notice that we start to see a little expansion on the new silicone hose. I expect this to look round and normal in a few minutes. Tilt your jug if you have to, but whatever you do, make sure that your coolant jug never runs out of coolant, or else you'll be wasting your effort because air will just go back into the system. When you see the gauge reading zero, just give it a few more minutes to pull and fill whatever residual vacuum is left in the system. But you can see that our new hose right here has already rounded out nicely, and the old rubber hose as well. We've right about finished filling the reservoir up with coolant, and it's now time to start the vehicle. Now, the official repair manual says to start and run the engine and set the heater to max, and just hold the engine speed at 2,000 revs until warm air starts blowing from the heater. At this stage, I'd also add that it's important to have a jug of coolant at the ready just in case the level drops when you start the car, but based on previous experience, as long as you do a vacuum fill, the level is not going to drop more than 2 inches. So you don't have any of that overheat risk that you do when you fill up the system without using a vacuum machine. All right, let's go ahead and start the car. As you can see right here, the coolant level in the reservoir didn't really drop, so that means we pretty much have all the air out of the system. But now is also a good time to grab your work light and just check and make sure that nothing's leaking in there. Also useful to have the front end of the car raised like this, just to make sure whatever air bubbles that are trapped inside the heat exchanger inside the cabin floats out and forward to the highest point in the system, which is right around here. And once you're sure that your coolant level is not dropping anymore, you're right about done. And that is how you do a drain and vacuum fill in your vehicle. Now, if you found this video useful, I'd appreciate if you can hit like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.